Is Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. I'm Sweets, this is CY, and we are talking about executive production of In Process and more broadly, the idea in general. Today, I want to kick it off talking about how CY uses In Process today, and then moving into how do you want it to feel moving forward. So to just start with how you're using it right now, what is your like daily or weekly cadence of using In Process? How do you interact with the product today?
That's a great question. I have a way I'm actually using it and then the way I'd like to use it. And they're deeply related. But I think it's also super informative as we go through the process of iterating through In Process, which is it needs to feel the way it needs to feel like it needs to be built to make it feel natural to use. And so that is why I'm very comfortable with having an aspirational usage, as well as like how I'm actually using it now, because that's a reflection of it. What do we need to improve to make it work that way? So selfishly speaking, I have two In Process accounts. One is for myself and one is for Music Nerd. The intention for the one that's for myself is in some ways similar to how I used to use Flickr, which is I used to post a daily image that reflected sort of like the best moment of my day. And, that was a personal, like Flickr's a very different product and it was a different life for me back then. But in this case, I feel like, in my creative work, every day there is forward motion. And sometimes the forward motion is kind of running in place. But there has been something done. There's been thoughts that have been kind of like reflected upon and synthesized where there's some proof of work that I'd like documented. And so the way I've done that is I've taken photos of calls I've had. I've taken photos of documents that I've created or sketches, just rather mundane things really, and posted them to In Process. And I've also posted things that are historical in nature where I feel like this happened a while back. And I'm thinking of it, not quite a Throwback Thursday type of thing, but like where I want it on chain alongside the other things that I have on In Process. And for Music Nerd, I have an intention of recording the history of Music Nerd, which goes back maybe a little more than a decade when it was a different product, but had the same ethos. And so my intention for that is to post a less maybe regular cadence, but one which I think ultimately sums up to some of the lore of what it was like, where it's me and Carl for the most part working on Music Nerd, but we also had the interns this summer. We've done screen recordings of prototypes in the past. And so for the Music Nerd account, I have the intention of taking a lot of the stuff that's on my hard drive that's that dates back to 2013 and get that into the timeline that's shown on In Process. So that's my intention and aspiration. And the actual, if you go to my In Process right now, there's pieces of it, but there's also, I think, a lot of work to be done on my part, in both on the daily practice, but also going through and when I find or stumble upon something that I think is kind of fun and interesting, to put it in both of those In Process accounts.
Cool. So the personal, it's the best moment of your day, like a Flickr type of usage. You're posting more or less on a daily cadence if it feels natural. Sometimes you forget or you don't feel like it, but that's generally the gist. And then for Music Nerd, it's recording the history, documenting, archival, less regular cadence, putting in the lore, etc. Moving into how do you want it to feel? I was taking a hike with Yoshiro Mare. We more or less go once a week up to a hike here in Cali called Sendero Cristo Rey Tramo Dos. And we were walking this week, and he said, I was watching some of the CY videos, and he noticed that you had mentioned that you visualize artists using it on a daily basis. And that to me was something obvious with In Process, that like that is, but he being outside of the team observed and got wind of that meme, watching the videos, the little shorts that I cut up of you on, I believe Twitter was where he saw it. And so that is one of the things that you've said. You want it to be a place where people can post on a daily basis, but do you have other, and you just said natural to use. So what are the vibes, or what are the goals for how you want in process to feel moving forward? What's your visual, what's your ideal experience of how in process is used moving forward?
Um,
Well, rather not how to use it, but how it feels to use it.
yes, yes. No, thanks for clarifying. Um, I want it to feel like a reflective moment, like sitting down with your journal at the end of the day and reflecting on what you want to remember from that day that seems notable. And I wanted to feel kind of beautiful, kind of a little bit of a small ritual that really is for the future you. And the future you is the one that does want to see the aggregate process of, hold on, I've got a call going on in the background. Okay. Back to the future you. I think in process, ideally, is a daily practice of reflection that records something for the future you. In the same way that one writes in a diary or journal, knowing that a week, a month, a year from now, you might flip back and look at this aggregate, maybe what feels mundane in the moment, but upon reflection, really feels like forward movement and progress and things that you can feel proud of. That I think is how I want it to feel. And in a sense, once you've had that feedback loop of reading or reflecting on old entries, in the case of my example of Flickr, I had a kid where, after she was born, I made this commitment to myself to post a photo of her every single day because I'd heard from other parents that it just goes by so fast. And Flickr became for me this evidence that it didn't go by so fast. There was every day of their growing up, and it's like evidence of things happening. And in the same way that, an artist, their work is their child. Like, it is good to really understand that there is no wasted effort. The process all accretes into whatever it is that you feel proud of as final work.
You mentioned forward movement. I've last week when we were talking about what your goals are for me on the tech side this month, or not last week, it was a few weeks ago at this point. And you mentioned it a couple times in this call of forward movement. Why is forward movement a concept or a mental model which you focus on?
I mean, time has natural forward movement energy, and I think it's really easy for someone who is creative, but also, stumbles into mental blocks and things where it feels like you're stuck. Um, it's important to feel that things have happened over the passage of time, even if it does in the moment feel like you're running in place. So it's both for, I think, the creative, but it's also for the people who are watching, because often, mental blocks are invisible to everyone except the person who's kind of in the thick of it. It's incredibly relatable, but when it's invisible, I think, creatives suffer in silence. And I think, to the degree that, if one has a regular practice of putting things on something like in process, and the people that believe in that person, who don't necessarily see the stuff between the end products that they share publicly, having a sense that there is movement on a regular basis is part of, I think, really finding appreciation and value of the final work that they do see.
In my own personal practice, I find that I will get stuck on a thing. And when I get in that stuck moment, I'll put it on the back burner and I'll focus on other things. And as soon as I put it on the back burner, it kind of becomes a weight in my head. And the longer I stay away from it, the more weight it feels like it has. And like you said, just coming back to it with a regular cadence, even if I don't advance it, but if I just look at it and stare at it and get more familiar with the blockage that I feel, naturally, and just spending that attention on it moves, it's like Sisyphus moving the boulder up the hill, and it's like
Right.
just focusing on it makes that tiny bit of boulder movement that allows me to like keep going. And then I find, like, what's in my mind right now is in Coop Rex. we are working with smart wallets and buying and selling coins. And the buy I've been able to get for our legacy coins, that was a fork of WoW from Zora, and then the new ones that are built on Doppler. For selling, I've gotten it done with Kook coins, but now for the Doppler coins, I'm hitting weird smart wallet errors, and I've been debugging it for like 2 weeks, and I keep leaving that and then going on to in process or going over to recoup. And it's what I wrote down as the most important thing for me to do today. But I woke up and right before this call, like it is just this big thing that's in my head, and I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to get over this, and it feels like a big weight. And I know I just need, after this call with you, I just need to set like an hour of time and just stare at the problem, and I know I'll overcome it. Like there's not a problem that I've been handed at any point in my life that if I actually sincerely focus on it, it's not eventually just with my attention able to progress. But the forward movement has been a very interesting concept. I'd love to hear more about your interns at Music Nerd, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I want to hear like, is this the first time you're bringing interns into your team?
Yes, it's the first time we've brought in interns that we didn't jokingly call interns. I've brought in people before who are, talented developers who have written things, and they have a portfolio under their belt. But we call them interns because they just work on projects on a part-time basis, and it's sort of for lulz. In this case, we brought in 6 young people. There were 3 men and 3 women. The men were college students, freshmen going into sophomore year. They were all majoring in engineering or computer science. And the women were 2 undergrads, also freshmen to sophomore year, but non-engineering degrees, and an 8th grader going into high school. And the hypothesis for this summer was very specific to what Carl and I have observed over the past year, which is Cursor has become amazing. And we thought if you take a driven young person who has an understanding of product and a very basic understanding of what engineering is, they should be able to build something that's actually useful in a very short amount of time. So our goal was to, spend the 8 to 10 weeks that each of those interns had to spend about half to 2/3 of that time creating and building something that made sense to them, shipping it, and then iterating on it. And I would say we were mostly successful. Not successful in having products where, often you bring in an intern and you want them to ship production code. And often you're disappointed. But in this case, the interns were able to start with a blank sheet. We had them pair programming initially to understand sort of the Music Nerd backend, and they sort of understood the ethos of Music Nerd. And then over the next few weeks, they built out a Discord bot based on Music Nerd, a Chrome extension based on Music Nerd, this sort of a explorable visual map of how artists are related called Grapevine. And there was a final thing called Music Nerd TV that didn't end up coming together as it didn't come together as far as we'd wanted to have it come. Oh, and then one more thing, there's sort of a admin / gamified backend to Music Nerd, the database. And frankly, of those projects, 4 of them are shipped and running, which is pretty amazing for considering the fact that none of these interns had really shipped production product before. They'd all done projects, and the projects were not all software. But it really speaks to the tools that are available, and a little bit of engineering discipline guidance can really ramp up a person with an idea into building something that can see the light of day and that people can actually use. That I think was really what ended up being the point of the internship, not so much to like, let's make the Music Nerd universe expand, which it did. There's like a product line now. But I think it speaks to how anybody who can get an idea out of their head and into their fingers onto a keyboard and iterate on it, maybe with the help of AIs or other people to sort of reflect and give feedback to, um, can make a product that people can use, and that's super super powerful. And you know, Sweetman, I know you've seen it yourself as we've observed artists doing, you know, building software, uh, and it's, you know, I think we all see it as it's another medium of expression. You know, whereas it used to be just, you know, playing the instrument, then it became making the song, then it became building the album, then it became like creating the universe of things around the stories they wanted to tell, and it didn't matter what the output was. They I think we all have that ability to um, describe it into existence now, uh, and that's kind of amazing. It makes I'm sort of like kind of like um, extrapolating now into where I think what the interns of like sort of that shown me in terms of like what I feel like the where we're at, like in the past, I would say 5-10 years of consuming feeds. Like this is what we as humans do. We consume feeds at this point. We're at the threshold of where I think synthesizing something from what you've consumed can become part of everyday's sort of everybody's everyday practice. So, and maybe this is overly optimistic, um, but I feel like one of the hard parts about doom scrolling being so easy is that you never take what you've consumed and synthesize it into something that you can call your own. And with the tools that are available, if you have like the tiniest bit of creativity in you to come up with new ideas, it's easier than ever to figure out how to express them in the way that you can share them with other people. And that's powerful because if everyone's just
It's very
consuming feeds as kind of this one way thing, and then we complain amongst ourselves, like that's not productive for civilization. But if we're taking in feeds and creating things and iterating upon them to share with other people, our communities, um, that's actually sort of a forward movement. That is a distributed sort of creative energy that we can all see as evidence that we're evolving. Like our ideas are evolving. There's artifacts of it, and you know this brings us back around to in process where, like, okay, like everyone's taking the things they have and making things from it. Where does that stuff live so that um, it has ongoing kind of like presence and weight? Like I'm not going to make a website. Like nobody's going to make a website. Not everyone's going to publish to, you know, the half-assed idea to X or to Instagram or whatever. But if you put it privately on chain, and when I say private, you're not like, you know, doing it in a way where you're like there's an expectation of like I want people to like this, but you're saying like I made this, I feel like it's worth keeping, and you put that on chain on in process, then it might not seem important in the moment, but it's there for posterity, for you to look at, for other people if they care enough to find it, they'll look at it, and it might influence them to make the thing that they make that they make next. Um, there's something there, and I think it's really really exciting.
it's important to create over consumption. That's something I've been really trying to work on my routines recently, and nighttime routine and morning routine I found have been incredibly important. And someone that I do follow on Instagram is sharing you need when you wake up in the morning, you need to create before you consume. You need to teach your body that we produce and we add into this world before we start scrolling and consuming. And I agree, in a world where we can synthesize, where we can consume whatever it is we desire, the ability to express, it's the Rick Rubin thing, like my ability to know how I feel and to express it is actually important. And a lot of people, they might feel something inside, but their ability to express it might not be very well developed. I'll take a pause here. I think this is the first comment we've ever had on one of our streams live. Yoshiro showed up. I think I said Beetlejuice too many times, and he showed up, but he just left us a comment: forward only, stay in process. Thank you for tuning in, Yoshiro. I don't know if you heard, but we were mentioning you earlier. So if you missed that, tune in a little bit earlier where we gave you a name drop. When you were mentioning musicians being able to like expand their identity, one, I agree wholeheartedly. You've seen it. I've been doing live streams with musicians, and I think the active musicians seeing their peers build websites allows their blockers that they have had in their minds for the past 20, however old they are, to dissolve when they're like, oh, Yoshiro's vibe coding a mini app for his sobriety and he's publishing on Base and on Farcaster. If he can do that, why can't I do that? And then they step into that mental model. And like you said, of forward momentum, let's just go back a couple years to Mint Songs or right after Mint Songs and before the big V0. Musicians would come to me all the time and they would just say, I have nowhere else to go. I cannot create an app without a developer. And so that becomes a blocker in their head for whatever the project is that they want to build. It cannot proceed. There is a firm blocker on the idea. The boulder cannot be pushed up the hill until there is some developer on the team, or they put their artistic vision on hold and then they go back to school, which is not viable for many people. But today, the first thing that came to my mind when you said this is yesterday I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw that Naval Ravikant is building a new startup. And one of the notes that he had said is, in the past, the people that would join my teams would identify as a systems engineer or a designer or as a product manager or as a software engineer. And they were well defined within these topics. And he said, when I'm building this startup now, everybody that I work with, they identify as a creator. They create in whatever it means to accomplish their goal. And so these people are no longer in these rigid boxes of this is my title, this is my role, I stay well contained within this. It's now, I need to accomplish this broad abstract goal. Maybe I need to design something, maybe I need to develop something, maybe I need to do some project management. And if you can communicate the ideas to some LLM, there's enough tools like Cursor, like Figma, like ChatGPT, like Recoup. There's so many of these tools that allow you to manifest it if you can take the idea that's in your head and synthesize it into natural language.
Yeah. The unlock for all of us is if we as individuals learn how to delegate, and delegating is the act of getting the thing out of your head and then asking someone else to help you. That's what makes that's the superpower. And it's not learning to play the instrument or learning how to code or learning how to operate the machinery. It is getting the idea out of your head. Like we're all creative directors now. And that I think is amazing. And as much as I think Rick Rubin seems like this weird godlike entity with a bunch of lore behind him, I think he's just really good at like understanding what he wants and then kind of saying things that get the people he's with to help make the thing he wants. That's the skill. That's a tool of expression, is like knowing how to articulate what you want.
And now today, we were on the call with In Process yesterday, and Latasha is now like, we are vibe coding Topia. They're not even inviting me as the dev into the calls, and like they're doing it all on their own. And it's like, wow, that's amazing that artists can now come together and they can vibe code and build their own platforms. That's exactly what we want. Because my time, I only have 24 hours.
And
give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for life.
Yeah. And truth be told, when they are calling you and saying, Sweetman, we got 100 users and things are crashing out, that's a beautiful thing to hear, right? Because it means that they've gotten themselves to the point where there's a problem with scaling. And sure, you can, that's just another layer of like understanding the problem so that you can then think about it and then say what you want. Going back to the interns, we have products that right now they built, they're usable by, a couple of people at a time. They do not scale. And that's okay, because right now there aren't, hundreds of people using it. But when there are, it's like these are the beautiful problems.
Wrapping up with one more question on reflection on your intern before we wrap up this call. How did the intern experience, you had already mentioned the intern experience, the impact of it on Music Nerd, is now you have a product line. You've got a Discord bot, a Chrome extension, Grapevine, Music Nerd TV, a gamified backend, a whole bunch of products now that you didn't have 10 weeks ago. How did the intern experience impact, if they told you, the interns themselves? What were their thoughts on you bringing them in and having them run through this Cursor experience, which is probably very forward thinking compared to other internship experiences, as well as your own mental model around the interns? You said this was your first experience. You had a mental model around it. What was the reflecting on it? Because it's over now, right? The internship's
they're all
over.
Off to school. I think the biggest piece of feedback I got from all of them really is something to the effect of like they didn't know that they were capable of doing that. And there were two angles for that. One is, especially for the eighth grader, uh, like they've never had to show up for work 8 hours a day before. And to be clear, we ran this internship in person at a co-working facility, so we were around each other all day long. And for young people who lived through the pandemic, that is actually a heavy lift. Like being around people you're accountable to, each other and to Carl and me all day long, it's draining. But they made it through. And there was some amount of reflection, especially amongst the freshmen who were becoming sophomores, like, man, if I knew I could do this, I would have just like put so much more of myself into school, right? That they could basically operate at this level and show up for a thing they cared about building with that frequency amongst that number of sort of like helpful people. That was a huge unlock. And also the fact that they were able to make something that was actually usable, I think was also a revelation to all of them. And I think that's really the most I could ask for them is like, they've sort of unlocked parts of themselves, which they can now really lean into and deploy just as like, here's the effort I know how to expend from the energy I have available to do stuff. Where I think, it's like they realize they have, their horsepower is, like they have like a 500 horsepower and they've only been using 100. And going back to school, I feel like we'll see, we'll find out next year after they have some reflection, like how much of that is an illusion versus where they're able to, uncover the iceberg and deploy all more of themselves into things they care about. But certainly there's like new energy there. I forgot what the other thing was that I was going to describe, but overall, it was super productive. And I think I'm super optimistic about the possibilities of like what happens when everyone has AI. It's like, yes, we'll be living in a world of AI slop, perhaps, but slop is what you create when you don't have taste yet. And that's okay, because the more you make, the more you figure out, what's good and what you like. And then you can start finessing that into something that actually feels right and good to you, and that the people, your community, appreciate about that as being an extension of yourself.
Do you see yourself running the internship program again next year?
Probably not. There'll be another version of it, I feel. But the actual effort of internship, Carl likes to joke that there's like on one end of what we ran, it was an internship. On the other end of what we ran, it was a summer camp. And, I think he spent a lot of his time essentially being a counselor, which ultimately, again, if you think about it, like if we as individuals have access to all this AI energy, we have to foster things along. We can't just be like, do all this stuff for me and not check on it periodically and give it guidance, right? Ultimately, we are, if we want to create great things, managing resources around us, whether they're humans or robots or whatever. And again, like maybe that's something we become better at. And maybe that landscape is really, really different in a year. Certainly it will be in, the next couple of years, but this is it's made me very optimistic about where things are going.
We're wrapping up. Is there anything else we haven't covered in this call that you'd like to cover before we wrap up for the day?
No, I think this was fantastic. Thanks for inviting me to talk about the internship. That was, I had forgotten how exciting that was. I really should write a Substack article about it. But for now, we'll just use the transcript of this conversation for that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, CY, for joining us.